All right, we're certainly glad that you are with us here this evening. And for our study here tonight, we're going to talk about a subject that, well, I'll be honest with you, I have never preached a lesson on this before. Never have. It is probably something that we do need to talk about. And we do need to see what the Bible has to say. As I was getting into this, I couldn't, first thing I wondered about is, how do we get started? And the one thing that kept coming back to my mind is that I want to start by asking this question. What do these groups have in common? What do these groups have in common? The Missionary Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio. The Church of God in Christ in Ashtabula, Ohio. The Emmanuel Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. The First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. What do all these groups have in common? Now, before you answer the question, and it would be surprising to me if you could answer the question, let's bring up one more name. One more place that is not denominational. In fact, it is non-denominational. And that place is the Burnett Chapel Church of Christ in Antioch, Tennessee. Now, what do all of these groups have in common? What do they all have in common?
Places of shootings.
All of these are locations in which church shootings have occurred. In which somebody, sometimes more than one, would enter into the building, most of the time during the worship hour. And they would come in and they would begin shooting and they would kill and injure as many as they possibly could. Think back 25 or 30 years ago. We're all younger at that time. But think back at that far. Can you ever recall during that time hearing about this type of thing? I grew up in the Lord's church. And I cannot recall for many, many years hearing about this type of incident. But yet this is exactly what we now live in. A time in which we see police scenes or crime scene tape around worship houses. That's the time that we now live in. A very dangerous time. Now, a lot of the skeptics would say, now wait a minute, and perhaps they would even say kind of harshly, well, why didn't God warn us about how bad the world was going to become? We could have prepared ourselves if God would have just warned us. Well, guess what? God did warn us. He did. He told us exactly what the last days were going to be like. Now just think about that term, the last days. Whenever it appears in the New Testament, what is it referring to? It's referring to the last days. It's referring to the time that we are now living in. God did warn us about the last days. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 9, God told us all about what the last days were going to be like. But let's bring up verse 1 here in the King James Version. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1, the apostle writes this know also that in the last days, the days that we are now living in, perilous times shall come. Perilous times shall come. Now let's think about that word, that phrase for just a minute. We have perilous underlined here and highlighted. What does perilous mean? does it mean?
Scary. Scary.
Scary? Okay.
Difficult.
Difficult? What does it mean? Troublesome. In the original language, the word perilous means troublesome, or, here's the second part of the definition, dangerous. And so God warned us, friends, these days were going to be dangerous days. Let me share with you the Douay-Rheims Bible. Now, this is an English translation. Not quite as old as some of the others that we have. But notice what we're told here, beginning in verse 1. Know also this, that in the last days shall come dangerous times. Men shall be lovers of themselves, covetous, haughty, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, wicked, without affection, without peace, slanderers, incontent, unmerciful, without kindness. They'll be traitors, stubborn, puffed up, and lovers of pleasure more than of God, having an appearance indeed of godliness, but denying the power thereof. Now these avoid, for these sort are they who creep into houses, and lead captive silly women laden with sins, who are led away with divers desires, ever learning, never attaining to the knowledge of the truth. Now as Jannes and Jambres resisted Moses, so those also resist the truth. Men corrupt in mind, reprobate concerning the faith. But they shall proceed no further, for their folly shall be manifest to all men, as theirs also was. We're told that they shall be men that shall be lovers of themselves, covetous, haughty, proud, blaspheming, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, and wicked. Wicked. Isn't that describing the times that we now live in? God did warn us about how dangerous these times were going to be. Since 1999, when they started keeping the statistics on this, since 1999 until the first month of 2018, they have yet to compile the rest of the data. But since that time, there has been 1,727 church shootings. Wow. 1,727 church shootings. In 1999, there was only 10. But it increased every year after that. Until finally we made a big jump in 2015. It jumped to 249 church shootings. In 2016, it went down just a little bit to 246. But then in 2017, it went back up to 261 shootings. Just in the first month of 2018, there were 21 church shootings. That number, without a doubt in my mind, would have continued to have grown. Now, somebody might say, well, what about the Lord's church? Aren't we glad it doesn't happen here? Well, friends, the fact of the matter is, it has happened here. During that same time period, from 1999 to 2018, and even beyond, there have been a total of 47 shootings in the Church of Christ. That includes the one last Sunday. The one last Sunday. The West Freeway Church of Christ, where someone entered into the building at exactly what time they come in, we don't know. It appears that they were there for a little bit of time. So much time that they became suspicious of this individual. They turned the camera on him. A security, part of their security team was watching him. The woman who was sitting in the very same row was so overtaken by him. She said, I couldn't sing, I couldn't pray. My family was going to get up and move to the other side of the building after the Lord's Supper. But sad to say, as soon as the communion, as soon as the juice had been passed, this man, right there, stood. And he shot two of our brethren. And he started down the aisle towards the front of the building. But this congregation was a little bit different. What made them different? They were prepared. They were a prepared congregation. They had security measures in place. They had a security team led by the man who would eventually take the shooter out. They had had their team in place for a year and had practiced. They were prepared. Now here's the question. But was it right? Was it right what they did? Do we as Christians have the right to arm and to defend ourselves, or for that fact, others?
I believe we do.
Okay, Sister Janet says, I believe I do. Do we have that right? Well, there are those who say that we don't. Even in the Lord's church, there are those who say, we don't. But what is the question that we need to be asking? Okay? We've been asking this question for different things throughout the year. What does the Bible have to say? What does the Bible say about Christians arming themselves and defending themselves? What does the Bible say? Now somebody might say, well, wait a minute. The Bible doesn't say anything about it. In fact, here's our friend once again. He might say, preacher, there's nowhere in the New Testament where Jesus gives us, his disciples, the authority to arm themselves. And when you stop and you think about that at first, you may think that that is quite correct. He doesn't give us the authority. But friends, the fact of the matter is, he did give us the authority. He did. Yeah. You use a little bit of necessary inference. You remember what is meant by necessary inference? DJ, you always remember what it is. What is necessary inference?
Using facts to come to a logical conclusion.
Using facts that are presented in the Scripture, you come to a logical conclusion. Using a little bit of necessary inference, using a little bit of common sense, we can see that Jesus did give us the authority. He did say it was all right. Let's notice a couple of passages of Scripture. Let's go first of all to Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22, verses 35 through 36 of this particular passage. Now, in here in Luke chapter 22, this is the night of Christ's betrayal. And so this happened, this is Luke's account of what happened before they went to the garden. Before that betrayal. Luke chapter 22, verses 35 through 36, we are told this. He said unto them, now he is Jesus here. He's talking to his apostles, to his disciples. When I sent you without purse and script and shoes, lacked ye anything? And they said, nothing. We didn't lack anything. Verse 36. Then he said unto them, but now, Okay, now things are going to change. When he sent them out the first time, they were not to take purse. They were not to take things that they might need. But now things have changed. Jesus said, but now he that hath a purse, let him take it. And likewise his script. Now what is a script, by the way? What's a script?
Isn't it money?
Even standard uses knapsack.
Okay, knapsack. Okay, it can hold money, but a knapsack would also hold mainly what? Supplies, provisions, food. Okay, so now you can take your purse, you can take your script. Verse 36, then he said unto them, but now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his script. And he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. Let him sell his garment and buy one. Notice, first of all, that the sword was far more important than the garment. What's a garment? Okay, the cloak, the outer mantle. Okay, so that one's cloak was of less importance than a sword. And if he didn't have one, he was to go and he was to sell his garment and he was to buy one. He was to buy what? A sword. He was to buy a sword. Now, why? Now, before we answer that question, let's first of all come to an understanding. And the first thing that we need to understand is that the gospel was never meant to be delivered at the point of a sword. In other words, the sword was not to be an offensive type of weapon. Not meant to be that. Now, how do we know that? Well, let's bring in verses 37 and 38. 37 and 38. For I say unto you that it is written, must ye be accomplished, that it is written, must yet be accomplished in me, and he was reckoned among the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. And they said, Lord, behold, here are 2 swords. And how did Jesus respond to that?
It is enough.
He said, it is enough. It is enough. If the swords were meant to be an offensive type of weapon, wouldn't they have all been armed? Yes. But they said, Lord, here's 2 swords. And he said, that's enough. Why would he say, that's enough?
Because it was just to be used for defense.
Okay. It was to be used only for defensive reasons. And so he gave his disciples the authority to arm themselves. Now let's go a little bit later that night. This is the night of his betrayal. Let's go now to the garden. He leaves his disciples in a certain place and he takes with him who?
John and Peter.
Peter, James, and John. And they go a little bit deeper into the garden. Let's go now to Matthew's account. Matthew chapter 26. And we're going to begin reading in verse 47. And we're going to conclude with verse 52. Matthew 26, 47 through 52. And yet he spake. Everybody there? Verse 47, and yet he spake, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves, and the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, whosoever I kiss, the same is he. Hold him fast. And forthwith he came to Jesus and said, Hail, Master, and kissed him. And Jesus said unto him, Friend, wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And behold, one of them which was with Jesus. Okay, now who was with him? Peter, James, and John. Out of those three, who do you think we're talking about? We're talking about Peter. One of them, which was with Jesus, stretched forth his hand, drew his sword, and struck a servant of the high priest, and smote off his ear. Then Jesus said unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place. Okay. This phrase is important for what we are talking about. He said unto Peter, Put up again thy sword in his place. We had that phrase there, put up again. What does that mean, do you think? Put up again. Put it away. Put it away where? In the sheath. In fact, you see, that's exactly what it means in the Greek. That phrase, put up again, comes from one Greek word which means to put it into the sheath. Well, why didn't Jesus tell him to get rid of it? Why didn't he tell him to throw it away? Why didn't he tell him to sell it? Why didn't he tell him to hand it over to the people who came to capture him? Why didn't he do that? He just told him to put it away. Why did he do that? He might need it later. There was a purpose for that sword. And that purpose was defensive. He didn't tell him to get rid of it. He simply told him to put it away. The sword was for defensive reasons. Okay, now wait a minute. What do they need to defend themselves from?
What did Jesus need to defend himself from? But he didn't, because it wouldn't have been part of the plan. But there's
Okay.
always somebody out there then and today.
Okay.
Then there again, like Paul taking the gathering from the one church to the church in Jerusalem, he was carrying a purse with him full of money.
For money.
He needed to protect it.
Needed protected. In fact, Paul did what? He asked for Roman soldiers to go with him. He needed protection. The apostles, the disciples in that day, needed protection because it was a dangerous time. Even then. Okay, now how dangerous was it? Well, okay, it's pretty bad.
You read some of Josephus' stuff, you see that it's much worse than I ever imagined.
Okay.
It was constant problems.
Constant problems. In fact, we don't even have to go to Josephus. We can look at one of the examples in the New Testament and see how dangerous it was. What happened to the man who the Samaritan helped?
Jumped
Oh,
on the
he's beating
thieves.
him wrong.
He was jumped, he was beaten, and he was robbed by who?
We don't know.
Thieves.
Thieves. By thieves. Here is Luke 10:30, the International Standard Version. After careful consideration, he was asked the question right before this, well, who is my neighbor? And so he shares this story, if you will. He shares this parable, if you will. He shares this happening, if you will, to answer that question. After careful consideration, Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of bandits. King James says thieves, singular or plural? Plural. So what does that mean? Boy, there's more than one. We might have been talking about a whole gang of them. And what did they do? Well, they beat him, they stripped him, they beat him, and went away. The King James says they wounded him in some way. It was a dangerous time. In fact, they left him half dead. It was a dangerous time. And so the disciples would need swords to do what? To defend themselves. So what does this teach us here? Well, I think it teaches us that it's okay for Christ's disciples, for you and I as Christians, to arm ourselves and to defend ourselves. But what about others? What about others? We have that right to defend ourselves, but what about that others? Well, let's ask this question. Here we have a group of men. So let's talk to the men. Fellas, do you have an obligation as a family man? Without a doubt. We have an obligation as the head of the family. What is that obligation?
Let the wife do it all.
Let the wife do it all. What is that obligation?
Protect.
Okay. Well, let's turn to 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8. Here once again is the International Standard Version. Each of us, as the head of the family, has an obligation to that family. We have an obligation. The International Standard reads like this: if anyone does not take care of his own relatives, especially his immediate family, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. We have the obligation of taking care of our family. We have that obligation. Okay. So, in taking care of our family, we're going to make sure they have enough food to eat, aren't we? In taking care of our family, little Samuel becomes ill. TJ's going to make sure that he has medicine that he needs, right? And our obligation to the family, if our family is in need of something, we're going to make sure that they have that something. That's our obligation. Feed, take care of, clothe, so on. But are we going to stop short? Are we going to stop short? Now, everybody understand what I mean by that? Are we going to stop short when it comes to someone trying to murder or to rape our family? No way. We're not going to stop short. We are to take care of that family. We're going to take care of them. What about the spiritual family? Are they not also our family? Should we not also have an obligation towards them? Well, I believe so. Now, once again, somebody might say, oh, now wait a minute, Tom. Wait a minute, preacher. We need to love our enemies. And that's true. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 44, ye have heard that it has been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, pray for them that spitefully use you and persecute you. We are to love our enemies. But who else are we to love? Who else are we to love?
Our neighbor.
We're to love our neighbor. In fact, we're told that just a verse ahead, I believe. But who else are we to love?
Husbands are to love their wives.
Husbands are to love their wives.
Wives are to love their husbands.
Wife is to love their husband. Who else we are to love?
Love the brother.
We're to love the brethren. Jesus said in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, he said, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. Who is he talking to? Sort of. Disciples. He was talking to his disciples. And so he was telling his disciples that we were to love one another. And that they were to love them how?
As they love themselves.
Like he had loved them.
Okay, like he had loved us. A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another, as I have loved you. That you also love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love to, or one to another. So we're supposed to love one another. Someone comes into this building, they pull out a shotgun or they pull out a handgun, and they start shooting. Yes, we are to love that enemy. But is that command supposed to supersede the command to love one another?
Say that again.
Someone comes in here. They start shooting. Yes, we are to love our enemy. But does that command supersede loving one another? Are we to let our brothers and sisters be murdered because we're to love that enemy?
I don't believe it.
No. It does not supersede that command.
And we're really not hating that individual, it's hating the act of evil.
Hating the action. Hating the action. Somebody might say, wait a minute, we're not supposed to do any murder. That's one of the 10 Commandments. No. Or we're not to kill. That's one of the 10 Commandments. No. The word in the Hebrew is murder. Do not murder. Is there a difference between murder and killing? Corporate punishment murder? No. Would be shooting someone trying to kill somebody else. Is that murder?
No.
No.
I struggled with that for a long time until I realized the God that said, thou shalt not kill, and thou shalt not murder, also said, kill all these people,
Right. Exactly right.
including your children that will obey you. So
Yeah.
you have to see there's a distinction.
There is a distinction.
Saying there.
There's a distinction in God's sight. There is a distinction in God's sight. What is murder?
A malicious intent.
Malicious intent. It is the unlawful of bringing someone's life to an end. The unlawful. What that man did Sunday, was that unlawful?
Yes.
The first man, the man all dressed in black, was that unlawful? Brother Wilson, was what he did unlawful? What he did was love for the brethren. And I would even suggest to you that the first security man who died, he gave up his life for them. In fact, what did Jesus say? Because we love one another, we're going to do, what are we going to do for one another? We're going to lay down our life. Because we love one another, we're going to encourage one another. We're going to restore one another when we err. We're going to bear one another's burdens. We're going to help one another when there's a need. We're going to pray for one another. Are we going to stop short when it comes to saving somebody's life? No. No.
An argument that's likes to be used in this is, well, if you're shot in church, isn't that just your ticket to heaven? So why not just, why would you, want to defend that? And it's a, one of those head arguments, but I've heard it, and, but if we let that happen, then we're taking power away from Christ, lives that can spread the word farther.
Okay, exactly right. One last thought, and this is basically going to be a thought. Something for you to think about as you leave here tonight. Jesus did say in John chapter 15 and verse 13, greater love hath no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. Here's the thought. What type of people are we to be? Think about that. What type of people are we to be? We can give all kind of answers to that question. But here's the answer I want to suggest to you. We are to be a prepared people. Prepared for what? Prepared for the judgment. We're to be prepared for temptation by praying about it. We are to be prepared to answer another's questions by studying. We are to be prepared. Here's the thought question. Should we not be prepared to defend ourselves and one another? Just think about that. Should we not be prepared?